That's the World War II U.S. Air Force hat. I'm 90 years old, World War II veteran, and I started in what they then called the Army Air Corps, because the Army had many divisions: Air Corps, Signal Corps, Infantry, and the Air Corps was part of the Army. After World War II, they made it Air Force. So let me take you back to how it started. At 18, I graduated from high school. Then I had to register for the draft to get into the service. We didn't volunteer only. They told us at 18, sign up, you're going in the military. Well, I did, and I thought that was the end of it for now. In the meantime, having graduated from high school, my dad said, get out of bed in the morning, go get a job. So I got up every morning, lived in New York City, toured all the buildings, knocked on doors. We didn't have McDonald's then. And in the city, we went to these big buildings, corporations, and I couldn't find anything for weeks. One day, my dad shook me out of bed again and said, hey, you haven't been going in. Go get a job. So I went to New York City reluctantly, took the subway in, and went into one of these big buildings in Manhattan, up to the 8th floor in an elevator, and as soon as the doors opened, 4 or 5 guys grabbed me, pulled me into the area, and said, where you been? How come you're late? What's the matter with you? Don't you get up early enough? I didn't know what was happening. So they said, take these papers and go down to 90 Church Street. Now, they're waiting for you. I'm still stunned, but I thought, well, okay, I take orders. Even though I wasn't married, I still took orders. And there I was with these papers, and I went to the United States Army Air Corps Materiel Center. Now you talk about materiel, that's all the supplies that were sent around the world for the Army Air Corps. And before I even got upstairs, I'm in the lobby of this building, guards all around with rifles. They wanted me to take a picture. They fingerprinted me, asked me questions to check me out, you know, this is security. And next thing I know, they sent me upstairs. I was interviewed, and I wound up in the mailroom in the job, my first job. Apparently, the guy that was supposed to get it never showed up, and probably I got there at the time he was. They thought it was me. Anyway, why should I squawk? My dad was happy, I guess, would have been. Here I am getting a job. Well, I was there about a year. And then the draft board called me in. I said, uh-oh, here we go. I'm going to be pushed into the service now, the Army at that time. And what can I do? I don't want to go over there and start shooting up everybody, especially infantry. So I went to the colonel who was in charge of the department that I was working in, and I said, Colonel O'Connor, I'm going to be sent into the Army. Could you help? And he said, why, sure, Callaci. How'd you like to be in the Air Corps? I said, yeah. So he wrote this letter out, gave it to his secretary, and requested that I be assigned to the Army Air Corps. Well, that was a good deal, because I was shipped to the basic training center and waited for a couple of weeks, because they were now forming all the different units of the Air Corps for Europe and for Japan. So I waited. Finally, it came through, and basic training was in Miami Beach. They took over all these beautiful hotels, stripped them down, carpeting, everything, put in bunk beds, and that's where the troops slept as we trained in the daytime. From there, I forget how many weeks it was. Anyway, it was a while. Then we got shipped off to Oklahoma, where Oklahoma State University now is what it is. It's Stillwater, for other training, which had to do with clerical and whatever else we didn't do. Continuing basic training, running and push-ups and whatever. After that, oh, that reminded me. While at Oklahoma State, we ran into two girls, my buddy and I. And they saw us and thought we were cute GIs, young guys. Would we like to go on a horseback ride? And as soon as we were off duty, and I said, what do you think, Joe? Yeah, okay, so we got on the horses. I'd never been on a horse, I'm a city boy. So I was on the back of the saddle with the girl in the front and he with the same. And this thing bounced along out to the countryside. All of a sudden the girl said, let's get off now. So they got off the horses. We all stood there. They jumped back on the horses and took off, left us, stranded in the field. Took us hours to walk back to the base. So that was one experience I had. Maybe because I was a Yankee going down south. I'm not sure. Anyway, from there, they shipped us to Washington, Spokane, Washington, Geiger Field, where the Army Air Corps was activating a bomb group that was going to be sent to England for the European part of the war. They had B-17 bombers. The Flying Fortress is what they called them. And they cost tremendous amount of money at that time. They were equipped with bomb sights that were accurate. They were the real force in the air at the time. Here's one of them. It's what they looked like. 4 engines. In the front, the turret is where a gunner would be. The back, there's another gunner. Underneath, there's a gunner. On top, there's a gunner. So this Air Force B-17 was the big deal at the time. Once we were all put together as a group, we were shipped to New York to board, can you recognize it? The Queen Mary, which is now in Long Beach, California. It's a hotel. But this Queen Mary was the largest, fastest luxury ship in the world. The Army confiscated, well, not confiscated, they borrowed it or rented it to take the troops overseas. They were worried about submarines, and these ships were faster than the subs, therefore relatively safe. And that was a troop ship now. And the troop ship that held 17,000 of us. That's how many were in that Queen Mary. We were trailed by subs because the captain of the ship would announce over the speakers activities going on, but we outran them and landed in Scotland in the dead of night, pitch black. And everything was done at night. That's so the enemy couldn't find us. The blackout is what we called it. And this place we went to had Quonset huts where we landed. These are the Quonset huts, which were all over England. That's what we slept in, these places. They had a coal stove in the middle that was supposed to warm up the place. The mattresses were straw, like sleeping on rocks, but we were only there for one night, so it didn't matter that much. while we were unpacking for the night, after we arrived, one of the buddies in the troop had a portable radio. He turned it on, and we were sure we're safe now because we got to Scotland. And over the radio, some guy from Germany said, "Welcome, welcome 401st Bomb Group. We'll see you soon." The Germans knew we were there. We didn't know where we were, but they did. Well, the next day we were put on a train, troop train, and outside of London, about 80 miles, we were based at a place in Deanthorpe, a little village in the Midlands. And again, in the Nissen huts is what we slept in. The 8th Air Force now had all these B-17 bombers that were precision bombers. We had, for every flight, every mission we called it, into Germany or France, wherever the Germans and Nazis were, we sent 2,000 bombers each time and 1,000 fighter planes to protect the bombers from being shot down. The Royal Air Force, the British Air Force, bombed all night. We bombed all day. And the 8th Air Force delivered more bombs than any other aircraft ever in the history of warfare. All told, in the I'm talking 8th Air Force now, the 8th Air Force had about 135,000 men who flew in these bombers. Let me tell you who they were. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, engineer, radio operator, 4 gunners, but each of them had guns as well. So it worked out to be 10 in a crew. Our air base, called Station 128 in Deanthorpe, was near many, many villages all around in England there, in the Midlands. And by then, I had been trained at the university at Oklahoma for engineering and operations in the group I was in of the 8th Air Force. The group, by the way, was the 401st Group. And after engineering and operations seemed to me to be dull, I would manage to work my way in to what they call special service. So I was in special services where we'd arrange for entertainment, education, lectures, all kinds of things for the troops to keep them active while they're not out there, blowing up things. One afternoon, one of our B-17s was taking off with the bomb load, and all of a sudden we heard boom, this fantastic blast, and this plane crashed just outside our village, in a little village called Dean. Blew up the whole village. And our captain, my captain in my department, always liked to take a nap in the afternoon. And he said, "You guys," meaning me and my other cohort in the department, "don't wake me up for anything because I like my nap." So he came running out after the boom, screaming, "I'm going to court-martial somebody. Oh, what's going on around here? What was that noise? I'm going to get you guys." And finally he says, "Who slammed the door?" There was no door. The whole village blew up. But we had 10 minutes to get the people out of the village. And most of our guys rushed, it's only less than a mile, to the village to get the people out of their little houses. Beautiful little thatched roof houses. And got them out so that they were safe. Now, funny things did happen in the Army, just as you see in some of the funny movies they put out. We went to chapel every Sunday. The base had a chapel, you know, and a mess hall and a rec hall. Well, the chapel, for us, it was a Catholic priest, Major Burke. And one day he went up to the pulpit, we're all sitting in the pews, and he reads from the Bible. He puts it down gently, folds his arms, and then looked at each one of us in all the rows. He had piercing eyes, and he'd stare and stare and stare. We wondered, what's wrong with this guy? Finally, he starts a tirade of filthy, vile language, every dirty word you can think of, screaming it all over the chapel. And it happened that we were all shocked, stunned. Finally he stopped, did the same thing again, stared at each one of us and said, "What's the matter? Something wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Is there something that disturbed you guys?" Then he stopped again and he said, "That's what I hear every day. My office window is right next to the mess hall, where you guys line up to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I hear that constantly. I don't like it. What are you gonna do about it?" Well, that took care of that thing, and I don't know if the guys ever stopped swearing, but it was a lesson by itself. There were also outside the base, because the Englishmen were all in the war. There were no help, no aids and assistance for farmers and ranchers. So what they did was bring in Italian war prisoners and pay them 10 cents a day to work the farms. I sneaked out one night to see what these guys were like, because my family was Italian, stomping through the mud in the fields and the manure, pitch black dark night. And I knocked on this chicken coop, which was converted to quarters for these 4 prisoners, and we got to talking a while. And finally I decided I'm going to ask him the question in Italian. I said, "If you were so upset and like America and didn't want to fight, why are you in that uniform?" And the one guy looked at me and said, "Why are you in your uniform?" And I thought, okay, he had me, checkmate. So that took care of that part. Next, we had, since I was in special services, visitors to the base, entertainers, like Bob Hope and all these people, USO. A famous actress, Marlene Dietrich, was coming to the base. So we had to get the hangar, the airplane hangar, all decorated and fancied up, ready for her arrival, a little trailer for her to dress in. And I was assigned with 3 other guys to stack dozens of barrels of beer in the corner of the hangar. Well, I did, but then all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, one of the barrels from the top rolled down and smashed my foot, which landed me in the Army hospital locally. And it was a little embarrassing because I could talk to the guys in the beds. Some were shot down, some were wounded in action, and I was wounded by a beer keg, so it didn't sit right with me, although they didn't mind. I was released from the hospital in about a week and back to Dean Thorpe, the air base where we were stationed. Months later, it was June 5th, 1944, the night before D-Day. D-Day was the big invasion of Normandy. We knew nothing about it, and we're supposed to be involved because our bombers were setting the scene for it. Well, the night before, any of us American soldiers who were out in the villages and the pubs or the streets could hear the people in England say, "Tomorrow's the day, tomorrow's the day, Ray," big celebration. We had no idea what they were talking about because we're the last ones to know there was going to be a D-Day secret invasion. Everybody knew about it. Then I got a call from the officer of the day, and he said, "Something big may happen tonight." Now this is the night before D-Day invasion. He says, "You're corporal of the guard. Corporal of the guard, you're going to be assigned a bunch of men. You take them out to the airfield. You protect and guard the runways and the hangars. Protect it from people that may come back and counterattack, like paratroopers from Germany." And he said, "You have your rifles." I said, "Thank you, sir. What about ammunition?" He said, "Well, the ammunition's locked up in a vault in that building across the field." I said, "Well, how am I going to get into it?" "It has a key." And I said, "Well, where's the key?" "I hold the key. If you need the ammunition, you call and I'll be right there with the key." So he has the key. I said to him, "What do I do? Tell this paratrooper to don't shoot me until I call my lieutenant to get this key and open up the storage bin, load my gun, aim it at you and shoot you?" Well, he was very distressed, told me to get out on the field, get on duty. So I did. Now, the interesting thing was the entire airfield was empty. Nothing was there to guard, except, I guess, mice and darkness. And our B-17s were out with the RAF bombing because before D-Day, we were softening up the enemy with air attacks. Our own Air Force, the American Air Force, sent out 2,300 Air Force bombers. This kind I showed you before. 2,800 of the 8th Air Force bombers. The air attacks began in February 1944 with these bombers. By D-Day, June 6th, that's the day of the Normandy invasion, our 8th Air Force damaged railroad junctions, airfields, shipping ports, bridges, and all the area along the English Channel, which was the coastline where we were going to invade at Normandy. Then D-Day, Normandy invasion, this is what happened when the troops came in by the thousands. This is June 6th. That's Omaha Beach. On D-Day, 24,000 British, American, Canadian, airborne troops landed just after midnight. At 6:30 in the morning, they had these amphibious landings that you just saw. Infantry and armored divisions, massive attacks and naval bombardments. The casualties at just that one big day battle, 6,603. Killed, wounded, missing, or captured. About a year after D-Day was May 1945. Hitler's Nazi Germany surrendered. These were the headlines. The Führer. The Führer was what they called the leader. Hitler was the Führer, which reminds me of a song that used to mock and ridicule the Führer, Hitler himself. This is what it's like.
Führer says, wie ist der beste Race? Die Heil, in the Führer's face. Not to love the Führer is a great disgrace. So we Heil, right in the Führer's face. We bring the world to order. Heil Hitler's world, new order. Everyone of foreign race will love the Führer's face when we bring to the world disorder. When the Führer says, wie ist der beste Race? Wie Heil, right in the Führer's face. Not to love the Führer is a great disgrace. So we Heil, right in the Führer's face.
That was taken from a record that Spike Jones made famous while we were ridiculing Adolf Hitler. Well, the sad thing was, although we beat him, it cost the 8th Air Force over 26,000 casualties, more than the Marine Corps and the Navy combined. 26,000 just from the Air Force alone. We lost 4,754 B-17 bombers, those I just showed you. And this includes, I guess all told, if we use the 8th Air Force, let's include the fighters and other smaller bombers, we lost over 10,000 planes. So it was the biggest massive battle ever in history. Well, after that, we found that we're right near what they call VE Day, Victory in Europe. And victory in Europe meant, well, we could go home now. We used to say, all of us, the Golden Gate in '48, because we're talking about being in the war in the 40s. And 1948 sounded like way in the distance, and the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is where we'd like to be. So that was one of the slogans, Golden Gate in '48. But we couldn't do that because we were still at war with Japan. Then we got a notice that we're all being shipped back to the States to go to fight the Japanese. Well, we were reassigned to an Air Force base in Sioux Falls, Montana, well, not in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I, with a bunch of guys, was put on this B-17, which became a troop plane now, a passenger plane, and we flew to Iceland to fuel up, then Canada, then to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In August, we were concerned about where we're getting shot up, going to Japan. Where are we going to be stationed? On one of those islands? But August 6th shocked us. I remember the day very vividly. All of a sudden, the newspapers hit this. We used the atomic bomb and hit Japan. We did it again the second time. A month later, that's all it took. This is what happened with the big headline. Japan surrenders. Because this was the real big surprise. Finally. From there, we were all honorably discharged, sent to our homes. I was sent to Mitchell Field in New York, where I was discharged from the Army, told to go home, and that took care of that. Which ended my career with the 401st Bomb Group and the 8th Air Force.